Bellator Featherweight Championship. The champ Cris Cyborg against Leslie Smith. A rematch of a fight that took place 5 years ago. Cyborg looking to make a second defense of that featherweight title. She's a perfect 2-0 since signing with Bellator. Smith, 4-1 since that loss to Cyborg back in 2016. Looking to acquit herself a little better this time around. Cyborg stalking Smith along the cage in the opening round. Big right hand drops Smith. So we thought this might be the end as she gets the big suplex throw as well. But Smith would weather the storm in that opening round. Brian Campbell had it 10-9 Cyborg. Late second round, Cyborg lands a hard counter right hand that wobbles Smith. She's able to survive again. BC had it 10-9 as well. Had her up 20-18 after 2. We go to the fourth round. Smith going to work here, throwing a kick, but Cyborg would catch it and then drop a right hand on her and drop her to the mat. BC had it 10-9 Cyborg. She was in control at 40-36 entering that final round. Cyborg again, a devastating right hand, and this time 15 ticks left in the fight. You see the clock right there. Smith cannot weather this storm, as with about 10 ticks to go, they stop it. Cyborg puts an exclamation on this rematch, defends her featherweight title for the second time in Bellator. She picks up her 19th knockout of her career, improves to 13-1 in her title fights in her pro career. It was Cyborg on the money line. The fight, in terms of the odds, to go to the distance, a -900, and it came oh so close. So here's what it looks like. She remains spotless in Bellator. Again, 13-1 in title fights. Spotless against Smith. She's the GOAT. She is the GOAT. All right, Bellator 259 in the books, in the main event, offering a rematch between the champ Cris Cyborg and Leslie the Peacemaker Smith. It was a first-round TKO for Cyborg in their 2016 UFC encounter. Now the duo in Bellator. Let's bring in the hosts of the Morning Combat podcast, Brian Campbell and Luke Thomas. And this time, gentlemen, Smith acquitted herself much better. It almost went the distance. Cyborg stopping her in the final seconds of the fifth. Brian, let's start with you. What stood out most for you after watching this matchup?
Well, what stood out most is the biggest change between the first fight and the second was exactly what Leslie Smith said coming in. She worked on her defense. She felt she was a matured fighter. Yet at the end of the day, all that got her was nearly 5 full rounds and still got her another TKO loss. And the reason for that, obviously, is just how good Cris Cyborg really is. It looked like Cyborg was going to overwhelm Smith early. There were moments in the first 2 rounds where you probably saw a finish not far away. You give Smith credit for her footwork, for her head movement, for her constant feints to be able to stay in there. But the problem with Cris Cyborg is she just hits so hard. Even when she's setting you up with jabs or going to the body or going to the legs, it took her some time to figure it out. Smith, tough. Smith, 2 finished losses to the great Cris Cyborg.
Yeah, I would say on the one hand, if you're Leslie Smith, there probably is a lot to like from this performance. I'm sure she's heartbroken that she lost, particularly, getting stopped with like 9 or 10 seconds left in a 25-minute fight. That can't feel great. But still, this was in some ways, at least defensively, maybe the best Leslie Smith we've ever seen. I mean, she was fighting Cyborg, right? So you're going to get hit, you're going to get dropped, you're going to get hurt. But to what extent can you extend the fight? To what extent can you make the person miss? What else can you do with that defense? And you also saw that she was able to clinch in certain scenarios. She had some decent trunk movement. Like, that was actually pretty commendable. But the problem is, as Brian articulated, the firepower from Cyborg still too much. The overall ability from Cyborg still too much. Even with that, though, I will say, for all the things I just mentioned, Cyborg letting this fight go as long as it did does kind of tell me she's getting just a little bit long in the tooth. I don't think an earlier version, even if a less refined one, would have let that go nearly as long.
Yeah, that's a fair take, because all fight long you were looking at a potential stoppage somewhere along the way, and you thought this would get to the finish line. Now, on the card as well, Austin Vanderford decisions Fabian Edwards in their middleweight clash. One that had these two laying on each other for much of the fight. Vanderford got cut with an elbow late, but wins his 11th straight. Luke, impressions?
I think if you were bored with that fight, I would not take issue. I mean, a lot of MMA hardcores and tastemakers want to say, if you don't like all the different aspects of fighting, you just don't have a great fight palate. And sometimes that can be true, but really not in this particular case. I mean, listen, here's the deal. It wasn't a particularly entertaining contest. Austin Vanderford, I thought, did the best he could given the circumstances, but two things. One, Fabian Edwards is actually very good and had actually really resilient defense. And so the two kind of canceled each other out rather than taking turns with offense, which is why you probably had not the strongest impression about it. I think that's one part. But the thing that really stands out to me about it, my major takeaway here is, look, Austin Vanderford delivered on expectations in the sense of, could he keep up what he's been doing? But he didn't show us a new gear here. We were looking for a finish. We were looking for some kind of positional advancement, taking the back, ground and pound, something. And to your point, he actually took the worst of it in that particular case from an opponent who was underneath. So he beat a quality opponent, make no mistake about it. But did he show us something new? Not really.
Yeah, you wanted to see Austin Vanderford, let's say, get a big finish here, make a large enough statement where there's no doubt this is the guy next in line for the middleweight title. It's still thorough and solid enough, though. And to Luke's point about Fabian Edwards maybe making it tougher than it could have been, which really put us in here for three predictable rounds, finish, in the end, leading to the unanimous decision win. Let's give Vanderford, though, the props that he deserves. The head movement was great, the setups to set up his strikes, and we all know he can lean on his wrestling if he has to. He really only, let's say, leaned on it in the final round and was still looking for the finish up until the final whistle when you did see both fighters bleeding and sort of a crazy finish there. But in the end, survive and advance, a very solid victory.
All right, gentlemen, let's take a look at one of the undercard fights. Valerie Loreda suffers her first loss, beaten by Hannah Guy. It's the Hurricane by unanimous decision. Brian, your reaction?
I mean, this still shows you, how far Valerie Loreda still has to go. You don't have to stop the presses. Is the train derailed? It's really tough to say things that aggressive when Loreda is so young and has so few fights under her resume. But we do have to be honest that her star, her visibility is still far ahead of who she is as a fighter. Look, this fight was sloppy, but it was fun. Dramatic swings of momentum back and forth. Loreda, young enough where we don't have to panic here, yet we still learned a lot about how far she still has to go to maybe live up to the hype that she gets for being who she is as a social media marketer and someone who knows their brand. Humbling to a certain degree, but you can take losses in the sport and you can't bounce back from them.
I mean, listen, you got to take what Valerie is going through here and understand that there's some positives and there's some negatives, right? Let's talk about the negatives here for just a second. If you want to be on national television in your fourth fight, you better be very, very good. Folks don't understand how hard professional fighting is. There's a famous Onion article, the satirical newspaper. It says a man overestimates his own fighting ability by 4,000%. People think it's something you can be born with or even muster in a time of need. It's really not like that. It's a trade, it's a skill, and it takes time to develop. And you saw in the fight today some reasons to think that Valerie Loreda could have a promising future. You also saw some fight IQ issues. You saw a ton of defensive ground issues. She did drop Hannah Guy in the first. It was not some kind of total loss, but there is a lot to work on. And I just got to say, as bad as that might look being on television and having this kind of a performance where you show some of these things, if you go around the country and you watch 3-0 fighters try to move to 4-0, you see what you saw here all the time. In that sense, it's kind of routine. You just don't see that particular product on national television. Loreda is getting fast-tracked by virtue of some of the celebrity or the acclaim around her. Well, careful what you wish for, because now you're under the microscope in a part of your career where you kind of shouldn't be.
Yeah, she was on center stage, no doubt about it. Our thanks to Luke Thomas and Brian Campbell, looking back at Bellator 259 for all things combat sports. Make sure you check out Luke and Brian, who co-host the Morning Combat Podcast every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday live on YouTube at 11 Eastern. You can check it out as well wherever you get your podcasts.
Want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis. No yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.